in yours?
Yeah, it was me. I just, oh, hello.
All right. Well, welcome to the No Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
And my name is Joe Augustin, and sitting in for Tim Wade is someone who is very special to the show. She's quite a good friend as well. It's Joanne Flinn. Hello.
Hello, hello. Gorgeous to be here with the two of you today.
That's awesome. And Anna has just published her latest book. Wait a minute, got to get it centered. Green Sight, which is the sustainability guide for company directors. And I got a pre-read. I think it's a super important book. Do you want to have a chat about your book?
Oh, well, if it suits you guys, of course, I'd love to. It's like having anyone who's ever had a book. It's like having a brand new baby, except it doesn't wake you up at 2 a.m. So it's got its advantages. But I wrote Green Sight because I realized that there's tremendous pressure on organizations to understand what sustainability was about, but there was not a lot written for company directors and the people legally responsible for businesses. There was not a lot that was in their language. There was not very much available. It said, okay, this is what it is. This is how it breaks down for you. This is what your responsibilities as a fiduciary and a company director are. And then what should your organization be doing? So it actually provides a roadmap of action and direction for companies so that they can get this picture in their head and get into action. Save you 6 months and $250,000 with McKinsey's.
Whoa.
How's that for value?
And I think that's what you should start with. You know, here's a book that's going to save you 6 months and $250,000, and the people go like, "How?"
Excellent.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to get the recording of it done in your gorgeous voice and use that in my prequel.
Yeah, nice.
I feel under a lot of pressure right now because I'm literally between two published authors. I'm going to have to figure a way to put something out there into the world soon enough. But let's see if everyone gets on my case enough. Anyway, welcome to you if you just joined us here on the No Show. The show is the show about knowing a bit of more stuff. I think I've come to settle it down I've settled it down on the idea that, you know, hopefully you become a more interesting person, if not a more irritating one, or perhaps both, who knows. The idea is to get a wider view of what's happening in the world. And as I've said on my socials when I share it, we're trying to save the world audaciously, one conversation at a time. As part of the way we do things, we also like to bring in extra points of view. So today we have a very special guest who'll be joining us, and she is someone who comes from quite an interesting background, and as someone who's just watched a show which features the country that she hails from, I'm actually quite interested to see whether there's more to that connection. I'm speaking very, very cryptically right now because I haven't had much sleep, but she is someone who helps people to communicate better in video and in sales, and she is Yasmine. I'm going to bring her in now, and if you can do a better job than I just did there, just give us a quick update. Who are you to the rest of the world?
So I am just a very curious person who's obsessed with one part of our body, which is the brain. And I realize that the brain is very complicated for people to understand. And I'm going to make it simpler. They actually use it on their favor to be able to sell their ideas and make that impact they want to create in the world. Because oftentimes the difference between like someone who can make a massive difference is not because they know better things, but they're able to better communicate their ideas more effectively. So that's my mission, to help people do that.
And by the way, the country in the show I was talking about, I'm watching Moon Knight on Disney Plus, and it features a lot of stories from Egypt. So tell us more about that, about you, where you come from.
So I'm actually a child of the world. My parents, my dad's Egyptian, my mom is Singaporean, and they met in all places, Saudi Arabia, as all great romances start in the middle of a desert. And it was really interesting because like when they went to Saudi Arabia at the time, like there was nothing there, it was just desert. And they both had like dreams for a better future, and then they ended up there. And I'm a byproduct of that. And I think part of the beauty of it is I realized already when growing up how although we were all communicating, there was so much miscommunication just because of our cultural lens and the way that we were brought up. And seeing that got me into this whole entire world. So I was with my parents would be arguing. And I'm like, you guys were saying the same thing, but in his culture, he means this. And in your culture, you mean this. And I was lucky to be in the middle to get both cultures. and to just realize that there's so much issues around that whole entire topic of being misunderstood.
Yeah, nice.
You must have been a very interesting teenager to both of them.
I was actually more like a therapist to both of them, because like I think it's like the world today, we have so many more tools. We have the internet, like and people like like Andrea creating content ongoing has given people access to much more information. But like we have to realize, like back then there wasn't access to the internet, so people just didn't know. And I think because I was like just in school, just studying a bit more, I was like, this doesn't have to be this way. It can be easier. I try to help my parents in that regard.
Yeah, I think that's such a great example of how the experience can define your career. That just what you've grown up with, like my family of 6, right? They're a very complicated, diverse group of people, and it helped me to because my background's communication as well, right? And it helped me to work out how to communicate to different types of people because my family base was so different. So I can really resonate with that. And then you've got the whole cultural layer on top, which I 100%. Think is fascinating. Yeah, nice. And then, back in those days, 3 channels, 4 channels on the TV. And look at us today and the amount of access to information we've got. It's just like, it's such a crazy world that we're in right now.
Yeah. So just before this podcast, I was walking with a friend, and she's like, yeah, like even big brands, it's all about how to be as direct to the customer as we can. And before we used to rely on like these very expensive ads. That would be the communication. It was one way we know better. And today it's not. Today it's a conversation, it's a dialogue, and it's creating things. And I use the example of Johnny Depp. So Johnny Depp, apparently, like obviously his case with his wife happened, and there was only one brand that stuck with him, one brand that was like holding his perfume. And because that brand stuck with him, their sales went up 50%. That's a consumer saying, hey, we like that you stood for something and we want to support you, right? And I think that's really beautiful that we see the world is changing in that regard, that it's not only one way, it's a whole dialogue of impressions and so forth.
Yeah. And often the people that communicate your brand value aren't even members of the company, right? So the whole micro-influencer growth. I get all sorts of weird people reaching out. Hey, would you like to be an influencer for us to sell dog fashion? No. Like, what about my profile tells you I would be even remotely interested in dog fashion? Yeah.
Well, see, the difference, Andrew, is you actually have a dog, and I never get approached asking whether I'd help with dog fashion.
Yeah, right.
So at least I picked up the fact that you have a dog.
Yeah, well, that's true. Have you guys ever been approached?
Well, I've been approached, but I wasn't sure what to think of it because I've been approached to represent one particular aspect or one particular segment, and I thought, well, I guess maybe I do represent eyebrow embroidering.
Were they after the before and the after shot?
Well, I think what they would do is that they were captivated by the before shot, and I went like, okay, I think we can do something with this. But I turned it down. But it's not as uncommon as I thought previously.
Oh,
what about you guys? Any weird offers?
Not weird, but like a lot of offers. I think the ones that I've been noticing a lot recently has been like these crypto spaces. Like, do you want to make millions off of crypto? And I'm just like, I don't know you, and I clearly don't trust you.
Not offers. The offer to be an influencer on behalf of a brand.
No. I was offered to be an influencer for this crypto space. Okay. Oh, please.
We should be talking to Joe.
But the one that I really like more is I really like the offers that like they give me essential oils or they give me like diaries and booklets. Like that one I can take and I'm happy to use. But the other stuff, I'm just like, it's not even linked to what I care about. Why are we talking about this?
Yeah. Anna, have you had some weird ones?
Sadly, I clearly am not ranking on the social media influencer space enough.
Oh, mate.
Well, apart from being asked to be on this show, right? I mean, that's got to be.
Well, I get asked to be on this show, and I get asked to speak at corporate events around sustainability and in banking and finance, and but they're never. That's the conversation. They don't use. It's a generation thing, maybe. They don't approach it as you're an influencer. They go, you're a thought leader. I'm like, oh, okay, fine, whatever. We're good. We'll be delighted.
So obviously, the other 3 of us have to work harder on the thought leadership front then.
Yeah, but you guys get but I think the point more is that there's different groups and different things that will appeal for. One's not intrinsically infinitely better than the other. To Yasmine's point, is like who you're wanting to communicate with and what's going to be meaningful in their language.
Yeah.
Well, as I raise one unkempt eyebrow, I'd like to introduce the show to everybody else. Here's what we do during the show. We're going to talk about the news that has been catching our attention, and of course, we're all welcome to give a few comments here and there. And then, of course, at towards the end of the show, we're going to talk about the theme of the show, and the theme is always based around our guests. So our guest is Yasmine, and we're going to talk about sales. But not just sales, right? You were saying something about doubt, right? What role does doubt play in sales? I can't wait to get to that. So for now, though, it's the news, and to be fair, I mean, this is the last show that we're doing in this particular season. I just want to give the credit that's due to the person that's due the credit, right? And that's Andrea, because this show is really Andrea's show. She writes most of the stuff that this show is based on. She goes around. You know, she does the curation. She does all the work that the rest of it. I mean, like I represent, I think, a certain level of presence, a commitment to the show by being here. And I think Tim not being here represents it in a different way. But, you know, she does all the crazy work that goes into this. So, Andrea, this is really, hats off to you. This is Andrea's work, all the news that she's picked up over the week.
Oh, thanks, Dales. I just think, it's just important. It's just really important that we're talking about some of this stuff and getting different views. And it's not about us having strong opinions on one perspective. It's about looking at the different angles of the news. And we need more of that in the world. It would help solve a lot of problems. So let's kick into the news. And just before I start, Yasmine and Joanne, do not criticize this band because we will then be trolled by their army, and we do not.
We're full of applause for this particular band. We think this band's actually an amazing influencer on a whole bunch of levels beyond.
Good. Which band? I know what you're talking about. I'm so sorry.
Drum roll. Yeah. Andrea is going to reveal all. Right.
We spoke about them a couple of weeks ago because they got into a bit of a spat with Tucker Carlson, the lovely gentleman over on Fox News. But BTS, the Korean supergroup, have announced a break to grow and pursue solo projects. And we were talking that they've got their fan base is called the Army, all caps. And if you go after them, you get the army on your back, and you don't want that. But basically, they're going through a rough patch, and they're all saying that they're trying to find their individual identities, and it's exhausting and a long process. And we can all definitely agree with that. An English translation said it's a hiatus, and that's been disputed. But basically, I think the young boys haven't had enough for a while and need a bit of a break, and let's see if they come back. But I'm sure many hearts are breaking around the world right now. These guys do an amazing job as far as, especially in the last few years, just addressing things like Asian hate. They really stand up and speak up about it. They're very gentle. If you ever watch them being interviewed, they're very sweet. And, the whole K-pop sort of thing doesn't make any sense to me, but I have respect for it. So that's a big piece of news for the army. I'm sure they're all in bed crying into their blankets right now.
Well, big army tears. I mean, I was also very surprised when I heard this news. Right, this past year they were the #1 act globally, and then I was additionally surprised to find out for the second year running.
Yeah,
they basically outsold everybody else in the world of pop music, and they did it 2 years in a row. And if you think about that in terms of the size of that particular achievement, that kind of knocks off Michael Jackson from his 1 year reign with the Thriller album. I mean, if you talk about apples to apples, you try to find some equivalents. It's just amazing to be #1 for that long, or at least to be the biggest sellers. I mean, they've beaten Adele, they've beaten Lady Gaga, all the other names that you normally think about if you thought who is #1 in the world pop wise, and it's not any of them. It's BTS.
Yeah.
I don't know. For me, like personally, I got really inspired because it just shows you how the world is shifting. And for like when I grew up, you only bought like Western CDs and Western cassette tapes. And the fact that today you have so many Asian stars coming and shining, and not just coming and shining, coming and like crushing it, like literally crushing it. Like to the fact that when I was back home in Egypt in Christmas, they were also big in Egypt. I was like so confused. I'm like, how did BTS get to Egypt? Like, but they are like they're in many people's hearts.
Yeah, they've the whole revolution that's going on in music, in the film industry. You know, there's a huge shift coming over to Asia, and yeah, it's a fascinating. It's just fascinating what's going on, and it's about time, right? Because more voices in the world is good. Another big story that broke in the music scene this week as well was Mick Jagger went down with COVID, and I think he's about 77. But I did some research, and apparently it's he's all right. He's feeling much better, so he'll be around and continue because they're doing a series of concerts at the moment. I'd love to go and see him, but I don't think I'm going to have a chance.
Well, I mean, he's 70. He's doing a 16 performance tour with the band. So I look at BTS taking a break right now and going, well, if you're seeing your potential career with the longevity of icons like Mick Jagger, you're going like, yeah, you probably want every now and again to have a bit of a break, a period to regenerate your creativity and sense of self. Any great top performer has breaks. And as a band, I think it's more visible when you take a break. Whereas as an individual, if we say, we're taking a couple of months summer holidays, no one looks twice at it. But when you're a collective, there's more attention on it. But I think it's a sensible, smart, long-term move as a collective and as individuals to stay regenerated. Otherwise, after the decade they've put in, we're pretty significant for them. And they've been an amazing influence on all sorts of levels, from a social level about so much of their songs being around respect and liking other people. They're not a violence-based message. They're a connection-based message. They've shifted elections just by the sheer volume of people that are willing to show up and sign up to that message. And I think that's just absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah,
in there. So
for good, right?
Use your power for good. So I'm kind of going, long rock Mick Jagger and BTS. We hope to see you doing your equivalent dance steps further on as well.
But I think one of the things that I like also about them is their message is always simple. And I think people today, we live in a time where we have to overcomplicate things. But the reason why they're so successful is because they've been able to simplify it, regardless of language, regardless of country. You understand those things. And I think that's really powerful as well to realize we can learn from them as well.
Yeah. We've got Denise joining us here. He's just saying he totally agrees with you. Take a break and reinvent. I mean, apparently ABBA's been back, right? So, everything's possible. All right, let's move on to Rebel Wilson. And this has been a really interesting story. So the first piece was a profile picture of her on Instagram with her new girlfriend saying, I thought I was after a Disney prince. It seems I'm after a Disney princess. But then it's turned into a huge, huge media outrage because this gossip journalist, Andrew Hornery, who is also happens to be gay, basically gave her 27 hours to respond before publishing. So he basically technically forced her to come out and say that she was with a woman. And the media is in Australia and around the world is basically just outraged and saying it's not okay, this is not right, And then of course people working in the what do you call them? Not the industry, but the community where they're trying to take care of the young LGBTIQ plus people. They're saying this is so dangerous. It's really setting a bad precedent. And, but I think it all ties into the bigger story around the media has gotten so ugly, in the last decade for, clicks so they can get customers and eyeballs. But, where's the respect? And of course, we're seeing it in politics, the whole trans conversation in America and in Australia was used as an election ploy. Some of the most vulnerable people in our societies are being used as fodder in the political fight. We're seeing them, and then we're seeing the media not respecting a person's right, coming out. I don't know what that experience is like. I talk to my friends who've come out and just ask them about it, but I personally could never understand it. But I think there's a bit of a reckoning going on in the media. It's well overdue. and let's hope something changes, because between the media and the governments of the world, their ability to divide us is destroying the foundations of the societies that we live in, and it's time that we say enough. And I think the Australian election said, yep, we've had enough, and we're not going to vote for these guys. I said during that election coverage, we were talking about it, I think it was a real Murdoch failing, the election, because the bullshit that they've been spewing for all these years. And right now, the Murdoch media is blaming the Australian government, in power for 3 weeks, for the global crises or the national crises they're dealing with right now. So, within 3 weeks of being in power, you're already getting blamed for the problems created by the guys before. So anyway.
The ones who were in for a whole 9 years, just to appreciate the 9 years into 3 weeks. Albo is a miracle worker. Didn't you know?
Oh, amazing, right? But yeah, there's a bit of a reckoning going on. Have you guys had a chance, or did you see any of the coverage? I mean, Rebel, good on her. I hope she's happy.
Well, I think what's happened also is that we have the shifting sands of what is normal and what's really newsworthy. I mean, in terms of like how you hear something now, if you talk about, you go like, did you hear about Rebel Wilson and her relationship? I mean, this is the first I'm hearing about it, and in my mind, I was already going like, oh, okay, girl or guy, whatever. I didn't really think ooh and ah and all that. So, but I do understand the dynamics of getting outed, as in like, against your wishes and that sort of thing. But I do think that the line is kind of shifting as to what is something that is just too much not to print about, or not to say anything about, and whether or not actually it is as significant and as big a deal as it used to be. Because I think if we hold some of the older standards and we go like, okay, you would never talk about these things as it was way too scandalous or salacious, but now it's no longer. I think about that, and if we can normalize it and make it so that people will go like, oh, okay, so we just found out whether she's straight, gay, or bi, whatever it was, and that was it. I think that would also be an interesting perspective. I do feel sometimes that we hang on a little bit too tightly to the things that we feel almost have to be announced at some point. I mean, I think, like, for instance, gender reveal parties. We probably give the revelation of a gender way too much power, right? So I think sometimes when it comes to outing as well, it is somewhere in that category. I mean, we've always had friends who, I don't know, just for me, just friends that you just go like, we've always known, when they out themselves and they kind of wait for the reaction. You go like, well, we kind of knew, I mean, those are the kinds of things that I think are more commonplace, and that should be kind of the way the world works. It should become a non-story. I mean, as in, like, we're just curious about who this person is, but that's about it. The orientation probably wouldn't be an issue at all.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing to also note is that you also have a lot of people who are raised in very conservative like little communities where they only see one perspective. And when you're coming into them and you're telling them a different perspective, it just feels so crazy and so not possible that I don't think they intentionally are trying to be like mean on someone. Is that they have never seen a world other than the world that they've seen. And I think, like, I think all four of us are a little bit lucky that we have been exposed to so many different nationalities, so many different ways of looking. The fact that we're based in Singapore and the exposure is super high. But if you like grew up in a small little town in the middle of nowhere in Australia, for example, and I love the story of Nanette, who's a comedian. She grew up in Tasmania, and she was like, she couldn't come out and be herself because the people that love her and, like she loves, would hate her. And it's heartbreaking, but they had never seen an option other than the world they were living in.
But she's also.
So I also am mindful that sometimes
So I was just saying, she was from the generation that I grew up in, and also in a country town in Australia. And we did have people who were gay in our community, even in a Catholic community. There were gay people, and it was becoming more of not accepted. It was just oh, okay, you're that, I'm this, no big deal. In Tasmania at that time, I think she's probably a little bit older than us, Joanne, potentially a little bit more sort of closed-minded, but even there, they're probably opened up. But from a media perspective,
but I mean, so Tasmania, we'd had Bob Brown as a senator for a very long time.
That's
Gay
right.
gentleman, it was just kind of, it was like, yeah, and so when I look at the whole conversation around Rebel Williams, to sort of like take it into the here and now as opposed to, where things were 10, 20 years ago. And I hear you, Yasmine, that different microcultures will have different norms today as well as in the past. Is what struck me was the first part. It was like they're talking about, her new relationship. I'm sort of going, oh yes, another celebrity relationship story. Who's Tom Cruise dating, kind of thing. And so to me, it was not so much about the piece was not so much about the relationship, because frankly, women's magazines, that's been fodder for a really long time. It was the fact that it was the pressure to say we're calling it because it's with a particular gender, as opposed to really.
Yeah,
that to me was where I think the call out on media is being completely and utterly right. It's like force. In Australia, the social rules are you don't force that one, and what this guy did was he forced it, and that was that was an abuse of power.
Right. Okay. So it's just not ethical. So that's the thing I was going to.
Okay, that's what I'm differentiating is the abuse of power and forcing a revelation that's considered private business was an abuse of power. If you're a public, that was the piece. It was not so much about a relationship. It was the force of, because if she was dating a guy who would have been, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It was the abuse of power used in the process that I think is the piece that at least the commentary I've been reading, I kind of thought, well, I'm glad that bit's been called out on. Yeah.
And then the wider experience on the community, especially the LGBT community who've been going through hell for the last couple of years. I mean, in my weekend reads, I'm going to share a Wall Street Journal, I think it's Wall Street Journal or a Vox discussion around being trans in America. What young people are going through in many states, like a parent can be accused of child abuse if they help their child transition or give them a medication to sort of stop puberty or any. I mean, it's really, really crazy what's going on over there. So, but even though this isn't a trans story, but it is impacting the wider community and, just the ability, the media, do they have the right to talk about stuff like this? And that's the question.
But the one thing I want to bring up as well is like back to the unawareness, because like, for example, last year I was moderating a panel and then there was these two gentlemen who run a trans education company for like corporate leaders. And like the stuff that they were sharing, I would never have thought of because I've never had to be sensitive for that idea before. And I cannot have that empathy because I had to be told actually. Because so when they were telling me in terms of like, I'm like, well, what do I call you? Like, you should just ask. I didn't even know that awareness and education. So I also feel like sometimes we judge, but sometimes the level of like literally like unawareness and people are doing it blindly. They're not doing it with intention or malice. They're just doing it, they don't know a better way. So I feel like there's going to always be parts where it's a little bit difficult for us to kind of like get awareness. And I think I would consider myself as quite an inclusive person because of my mix and everything. But that's just things I just don't know. And then if I don't know them, I might come across as being uneducated or I might come across as being rude, but it's not the intention I have when I'm acting that way.
Yeah, but a journalist for a major or national newspaper operates by ethics, right? There's rules.
Ethics.
They're personal value systems.
And there's personal value systems, and there are gossip columnists, and I wish those people never existed. But beside the point, right? But there's certainly ethics and personal values that need to come into it. But there's also, just a code of conduct. But something like that, I've got the story. I'd like to share the story. Would you like to be part of the story? Versus you got 27 hours, and I'm going to publish, which was basically what he said. And then the editor, who only got put in at the beginning of the year, first of all, they denied the story. Then they came back with 2 additional apologies. So, I mean, it's just a mess. But the bigger conversation to me is about the media's role in the world and the damaging role that it's having in the world. And in this case, Rebel, if you don't follow her on social media, she's very active and she's always sharing stuff, and her whole diet journey was done, Instagram. She's very, very active, and she shares her life. She's not hiding anything, but I do think that conversation needs to happen about the media and their role in society. And this is just part of the story for me.
Well, for me, what I feel about this as I'm hearing it actually is that I think that's what they kind of did in terms of giving them time to respond. But I think it was the bad taste. I think that everyone decided that it was gonna leave in their mouth after. Sometimes when something comes up, you kind of go like which way to go, and then the audience looks to its left, looks to its right, and goes like, okay, so this is the appropriate reaction. I don't know. I'm a bit.
Joe, that comment, giving her time to respond, it shouldn't be about that. It should be, is this something that you even want the world to know? Because if you don't, or if you're not ready for it, why should you be forced? This is what she did, and so then the Herald is annoyed with her because she actually gives up the story, right? But and she's a courageous lady. But what if she never wanted the world to know that? What if she was just going through an experimental phase, and then the next person was a bloke, right? It's if I fell in love with a woman, when I decide to tell my community that that's happened, is up to me. It's my time frame, right? Just because she's famous doesn't mean she hasn't got the right to control that time frame, surely.
Actually, in some places, it does. Is that if you're considered a public figure, there's an acceptance that as you're a public figure, there's a different amount of information that is considered appropriate for comment. And if you think about it, take it off the particular case of her and the particular issues around it. If you had somebody who was holding out that they're doing this, and this, say as a politician or a senior businessman, where often you'll see this one, and yet they're actively doing something that is against the value system they're holding out. That's where and that's where these original laws of slander and libel come from, is that you want to be able to call them out, but you also want to be able to protect the reputation of the individual. And in that, there's a clearer definition on what's public and private property. And as soon as you're particularly like high influencer, so there's a part of me that going, the mere fact that I'm not asked to will I be an influencer means I don't have as much risk of being a public figure, and therefore losing the defense of saying I'm a private individual, and no, that's not fair game. So there is something that happens when you are, and when you're in the movies and things like that, you kind of automatically by definition become public. And I agree on the choice thing, but you kind of, it's not, the media still has a role of calling things out, but there's got to be a nicer way of
but it's the bigger impact. It's not, because it's not just her story, it's the impact on the people, the younger people who are in the same position, right? So it's never just about the story. It can't be, because then you're just not paying attention, right?
But I suppose the question here is, media has a strong responsibility and accountability for what it publishes.
Yeah.
I've never
looked at like gossip columnists anyway along the spectrum of journalists anyway. But I think in terms of interest and stuff, I do see it this way. I think at the moment you have someone called publicist on your payroll, or you have a publicist working for you, your business includes kind of like getting the public to speak about you, and it does kind of shift you into the crosshairs, if you like. So if anything, I feel sometimes discretion is also something that is something that you have to take hold of. If you are discreet and no one sees anything, that's fine. But if you happen to be seen, you have to be prepared. So when I was, not that I'm a celebrity of any magnitude in Singapore, but there was a time when I felt I was being watched. I always thought to myself, I have to do everything that I'm prepared to be seen publicly doing, right? That's basically it. So I don't know. I do feel that when you make your living publicly, you have to be prepared for things like this to come up. And honestly, the person working behind the counter at the bank isn't going to get this kind of coverage. It wouldn't even make it wouldn't even make a tea room conversation, I think, sometimes. But if you happen to be famous, you've got to take both sides of it, right? Because fame gets you a lot of the stuff that you have as well. It's gonna come with some of the sides you might not like as much. So there's some people who have withdrawn completely from it. I mean, like you've had what's his name? I can't remember now, but Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. You know that guy, Rick Moranis. Yeah. He completely removed himself from the business and didn't, just basically didn't do anything else and all that, and basically said, you know what, I'm gonna be private now. I'm gonna look after my kids and all that. And there was some talk about that, but because he had left the room and stopped doing that stuff, basically was left to what he wanted to do. So it's a mixed bag. I really feel that if you aren't promoting movies at the same time and doing something and trying to get a project off the ground and all the different things, if they just randomly swoop down and do a story on you, but if you happen to be, I mean, she is, I won't say flavor of the day, but she's very much in vogue for these few months. I mean, she's done a lot of nice things. She's come out on the, doing lots of press, promoting the movie, having a good hit on Netflix, all those things. It does shine a spotlight. Yeah. I don't agree with I don't agree with forcing her hand. I mean, just want to be clear about that. But I do also understand, that there's a lot of calculus involved.
Yeah, but I also think I'm sorry, but tabloids, I would not consider as at any point of time journalism. It's just somebody who's, and they also don't get paid very well, except for the photographer who gets the proof point that they can actually use. I don't know. I just find it but I also kind of agree with Joe. When you are a celebrity, that's part of your reputation. And there's actually a show on Netflix a couple of months ago where it was filmed in the pandemic, making fun of actors in the pandemic. And in the end, the bubble, and they had this one girl who had I don't know how many million followers on TikTok, but also the way we market and how we get things out there today is no longer how it's been before. So part of building that personal brand is actually your clout in the conversation and when you're moving forward in the business transaction as well.
All right, you broke up a little bit there, babe. But anyway, let's move on to the next story. I think we're inconclusive on that. I think, I've never been a gossip magazine person anyway, so but every now and again I do have a look at
Andrea, mostly when you have your hair cut. It's either that or the dentist.
That's the only place.
Yeah, exactly. That's like, goes and read something.
I gave up on girl magazines when I was a teenager because I realized they were making me feel bad about myself. So the teen stuff. So I just went, nah, I'm not reading this anymore. And I've stuck by it ever since. National Geographic for me. All right. Another really good news story this week was Aaron Banks loses libel action against reporter Carol Kaduwala. Now, I hope I'm saying her name correctly. So she did the famous TED Talk on misinformation and the social media companies and what they're doing. And then she recently did one on the weaponization of social media and how Putin's basically used it. And we're being at war with Putin from a social media perspective for a decade. And we've talked about this before. But in the UK, you can take a journalist to court as an individual in a libel case, which is an unusual thing around the world. And she has been through hell and back in this process. And she's a whole bunch of people have come together and helped her crowdfund to pay for the case. If you ever have an opportunity to listen to what she says, have any of you guys either watched her TED Talk or some of her recent videos? Did you watch the weaponization of social media? No. I shared it a while ago. Anna, did you have a look?
Well, I've followed Carol Kaduwala for a long time. She was an FT columnist way back, and being in the finance media as a very incisive commentator for a very long time. I mean, she's someone who lived and breathed the industry and observation. So, she's a proper old school journalist. Yeah. Get your facts and be prepared to have the courage to break the story. So when I saw that announcement this week, it was definitely a moment of goodness.
Yeah, so it's a significant decision for public interest journalism. So she's one of those people that does the really deep research that can take years and years and years. And a lot of those big sort of reports that get broken, that, the Guardian's been doing the work for like 4 or 5 years. She's one of those journalists that's behind that. So anyway, I just thought it was a great story because, of course, Aaron Banks has been tied to Russian money and Russian friends and influence, and of course, in these days and age, that matters. So yeah, so good news.
Exactly.
All right, the Maasai are under attack in Tanzania, and our friend Kevin Cotton, the global nomad, he's been sending me some stuff, and I started looking into it, and I don't know if you saw that they were attacked and they've been driven off their land so that some very, very wealthy people from the UAE can go and have a luxury game reserve and obviously go hunting. This has failed in the past because of protests. There's no question that because of the economic impact of COVID, that it's a way to get a lot of money into the country very, very quickly. But it's so wrong on so many levels. It's just it boggles my mind that we're even here. First of all, like the diversity in ecosystem there that needs to be taken care of because extinctions on the rise. But the Maasai people, we need to take care of them. We need to honor them. We need to listen to them. We need to learn from them. But the barbarity of it, and there's a lot of propaganda by the government. Kevin's talking to people actually on the ground, getting real-time feedback, but people who are being found sharing images or videos in the Maasai community, they're being arrested and nobody knows where they are. So, you can see some terrible photos of people. And for the first time, they're talking about taking up arms against the government, and they're not a violent community. So I just think we've just got to, it's not getting enough attention. I was pleased to see The Guardian publish a piece, but it's not getting enough attention, and it deserves attention because these people deserve to be protected and they deserve our voice out there in the world. So any thoughts?
Well, I think it's quite
I don't know, it
incredible.
kind of
because,
reminds me.
Just in terms of coverage, I think we might be the only time anyone, if someone's watching the show right now, it might be the only time they've ever heard of it because it's one of those stories which doesn't come up on the main feed,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
exactly.
And like for me, like years and years ago. Yeah, so years and years ago, the first time I went to Kenya, it was a different story, but pretty much the same as we're having right now. And it was a time where you had a couple of Americans who were killed in the embassy. Want you to know the story? And it was like 7 Americans killed, and then afterwards you had so many Kenyans that were injured, nothing covered about them or their families. So a few months later, when I'm actually in Kenya, there was like fire and there was riots and there was no coverage about it. So what I kind of see is like media today is selective in terms of who has that bigger pocket and that bigger space. And obviously, unfortunately, the animals that are in the Masai Mara, like many different national parks, are not important for people because they're a tiny community that doesn't matter in many people's eyes, which is very, very sad.
Well, the funniest piece is the game reserve is wanted because of the animals that are there, but the people are an inconvenience. So it's that, yeah, exactly as been said there, the history of going in and taking tribal lands. And what I find, so what's happening right now in Kenya is horrible. And then we sort of come other parts of the world where people are going, well, how do we create apologies and restitution? And what kind of governance goes back to the tribal, traditional, original, depending on the country you're from, the people who've had their historical connections with the land. Because that 2 layers of people who've been living there and the legal system coming in and saying, well, how do you want to parse it up, which is a power game. And often it's absolutely stuff all to do with those who are on the ground until the power system who's drawn lines says, okay, well, we really want that now. We'll send the guns in. And
you're having a bit of a breakup. So Janice is just sort of commenting, no excuse. I totally agree with him. And, look, we need to rise in consciousness if we have any chance of sort of overcoming the challenges that we face as a global society, right? All through history, we've got all these stories of coming in, decimating, through sickness or just through violence, Australia with the Aborigines, New Zealand with the Maori community, like all over the world, right? And we look at, I've talked about this before, but when we come from the country that have been the victors, we're the good guys, right? But the reality is we've destroyed, killed, and lost so much ancient wisdom, and it's time to recognize that isn't a sign of our success, because we can see that now more than ever we actually need the Indigenous thinking and their heritage in all of these environments around the world to save them. So I don't know, I think we need to go through such profound change in our communities if we've got any chance of overcoming. And to me, the fact that this is happening now just shows us, like if you look at around the world, there's all these negative old way of the world things going on, the war in Russia and Ukraine, right? And if we don't get out of that mindset, are we ever going to make it?
Well, there's some things about we have a tendency, I think, to cherry pick as well, right? We tend to look at things and go like, oh, there's terrible things from the past we don't do anymore, and then these great things we do now, and then we talk about the great things we don't do anymore. I mean, we tend to look at both sides. We tend to cherry pick the one that feels better for the conversation. I do think things move on, things get forgotten. There are things that we can always gather around and celebrate how great the wheel was. But it does get to a point where the wheel is like, okay, well, it's a wheel. It was there, it was good, it was tight, it was big for its time, and now we moved on, right? And then same with fire. So there is unfortunately something to it. There's of course always two sides of the coin, but I look at Singapore as the counter example. Like in Singapore, we have hardly any real history in terms of buildings. If you look around and go like, what was there before? I can't recall, because every few years we get rid of the building. Yeah, so that's that constant. It's the constant progress that happens, right? And if you think about it, even in nature, what happens is that there is that constant moving forward. Actually, what actually happens in nature is nature overruns it tends to overrun whatever was there. So sometimes it's going to be weeds, sometimes it's going to be these flowers, sometimes it's going to be these insects, sometimes it's going to be these frogs, right? Of course, maybe man did introduce some of those frogs, but I mean, the nature of nature is that it does overrun, it does supersede what was there before, and some of that naturally happens. So I do realize that yes, we do feel that we should be looking at the wisdom and all that, and I think that's definitely going to be there, but we also have to realize that there was a price sort of like paid, to do this, right? The price for us having all the technology that we have now. I mean, people being able to have access to the internet and Google this and that and whatever is this. The price now is that we don't have specialized. We don't have broader skills anymore. People are ultra specialized in terms of their information and their knowledge. They don't have broader wisdom anymore, or they're not as broadly educated anymore. If you ask an engineer nowadays, how do you make a pencil, you're less likely to have someone who knows how to make a pencil than back in the old days, right? Because back in the old days, you had to know everything. Now we ultra specialize. But it's also part of the price that we paid, because now we're here in a world where things happen the way they do. We've got the Googles, we've got the Apples, we've got all the high tech, we've got the self-driving cars. We're going to lose, some carpenters along the way.
Now, I just want to disagree with one thing you said, was nature always overruns nature. Nature doesn't overrun nature when it's an introduced species like the cane toads in Australia or the rabbits, that sort of thing, right? But nature typically doesn't overrun nature, because then it can't survive. So, that's why the migration paths of birds are so important, because they go here at this time of year for this, and then they go to the next place. So they never overrun nature. Humans are pretty unique at that. Would you agree with that?
I don't think we're guilt-free in terms of being responsible for some of that. But I mean, if you think about the dodo, for instance, right, the bird and the way it evolved, right, it was bound for extinction. It was not going to survive in the long term. All that would have to happen was if someone did introduce cats or other kinds of predators on the ground, this was a bird that was not going to survive. It could not survive. It would be killed by other predators, right? I mean, we accelerated it as human beings, but I think sometimes, yeah, things are going to happen that way. I mean, you know, if you think about what would have happened naturally as well, I think I'm not even sure if human beings would have really thrived in Australia, given the number of venomous creatures you have running around. You know, it may not have been as hospitable, but we kind of leveraged our way into that. But yeah, I do agree that we've been responsible for bad things. You know, cane toads, all that. I can't remember what else. The rabbits. I think rabbits into Australia at some point. That was also a contribution by the Western world. But you know, at the same time, I do think when you look at when you just look at ecosystems, they're never static. They move up and down, and they're going to come to a point where it does shift in a certain direction. And sometimes when something outside of them happens, like if we assume that, okay, we control as human beings everything, then we're responsible for it. But when, let's say, we're not responsible, the ice age, for instance, that changes the balance. It's going to move certain things a certain direction, and then something else happens. So it is a balance that isn't going to stay static when something changes within that. So I recognize we need to do something. I recognize that we are responsible. We have been responsible, and I say we as in the human race over the centuries. But at the same time, there's certain things as well that are the way nature works. I mean, nature is going to do that, because if we, for instance, if we don't live in a city and we just abandon it, it gets overrun, and it doesn't just get overrun uniformly. Certain kinds of vegetation, certain kinds of animals are going to be dominant in that particular area because of the advantages that are naturally there for them. So that's what I mean by how nature overruns. It tends to do that when the weather gets a little less wet, a different kind of vegetation kicks in, and that sometimes favors another kind of animal as well, which then feeds you know, it's all connected that way.
Yeah, agree. You girls? No? Any thoughts?
I don't know. I feel like it's all evolution. And I think also it's easier to look back and judge than to understand what people are going through at the moment. And if you look at just like what people go through on a day-to-day basis, and if you look at also like survival and some basic things that are there, and as a species, we're looking to always solve problems. But sometimes we solve a problem on a micro level, not on a macro level. And that's where I feel like the problems that we have today is because we've been really good at solving micro problems and not realizing the consequences at the macro level. And that's why when you see, like, for example, like what Joanne's doing, this amazing work around like the climate change, is like we didn't know this stuff the way we know it today because of the data technology in place, that it's undeniable. Before, people were saying it, but it was not, it was arguable because people couldn't always like agree on that. But now it's undeniable. And I also think it's because of the fact that like we can see a problem on multiple levels because as a species we've also evolved. So that's my take on it, is that like we've always been solving problems, but sometimes we don't see the bigger impact of those problems.
Yeah, I often wonder why can't we do that? Like, what, you know, like if I do this could happen. I mean, we learn about consequences as children, right? And on a global scale, why can't we? Like, we've got plenty of examples in our history, and like even today, so many. There's some pieces that we'll talk about in a bit, you know, where just the way people think means that they're incapable of thinking. Go.
Yeah. I don't think it's like they cannot do it. I just think it's like they never had to look at that different level. Because let's say you ask the question, how do I make more food? Simple question. And like, okay, cool. Well, if I do like a manufacturing line, or if I do like a production line, or I create a farm that's better structured, I will make more food. Cool, great. Now, no one thought about the fact that when you do that, the impact you have on the environment by doing that kind of production line, because that wasn't the question we were asking. If we ask the question, how can I make more food sustainably? It's a very different question than how to make more food. So what has been happening in the past is we've been solving problems from that very simple one-dimensional lens. And today we're discovering that it cannot be the case anymore. So we can do it differently, but I think it goes down to asking better quality questions so we can figure out solutions for the better quality questions.
So this is one of those things so I think this is a really fascinating thing, right? So that totally, I'm agreeing with what you're saying, but okay, so we've talked about this before. Back in the beginning of the last decade, we had 500 million middle class. Now we're at 3.2 billion middle class people, right? And I know that there were people in the world that were going, whoa, this is big, So if we go from 500 million people to 3.2 billion people having refrigerators, cars, can go on international travel, eat lobsters, eat beef, that's probably not going to be a good thing for the environment, right? and the information about the environment was already well established, at least, Al Gore sort of put it on center stage. So for me, is it the short-termism of democratic politicians where I'm only going to be in for this sort of period of time, so I'm going to be short-term focused and don't worry about that because that's later? Or is it something else? So for me, it's like, it's almost giving an excuse about we don't ask the right questions. That's an excuse. We expect the leaders of business in the world to go, Westinghouse or whoever makes fridges. They must have at some point
I don't know. I look at it from a sale.
That's well known, right? The ozone hole in Australia was in the 90s. Sorry, go.
So line cut off when you were speaking, and then I got up, I think, when I was speaking, so I didn't hear what you said at your last point.
Well, I was just saying, like in Australia, we grew up with the ozone hole, and that was in the 80s, right? And they worked out it was from refrigerators. That was in the 80s, and then so they sort of changed whatever the CFCs,
chlorofluorocarbons.
Yeah, and they sorted it out. They're back in the atmosphere now because apparently they're being released from factories in China. But we worked it out, closed the hole. Amazing, we can do something. But then all these other people started buying refrigerators, which was still bad. And like, I'm sorry, but the CEOs of those companies, the consultants serving those companies, the governments leading those countries, like, how did they ever allow it? Like, literally, they see the pictures of China in the 80s, everyone's on a bicycle. You look at China now and everyone's in a car. How are we really going to believe that Nova never sort of sat there and went, this could be a problem? Pets, right? Have you ever looked at the growth in the industrial growth of pet food, which has fish and meat and chickens, right? And it's just gone like that. And, in Asia, you see people who went from not having pets to having pets. And we've witnessed it in our lifetimes, right? That's an industry that's just gone like that. They've all just gone like that. And this idea that no one was paying attention, how could we not have?
Okay, so I'm just going to throw it to you. It's like, do you have a pet?
Yeah.
You have a refrigerator?
Yeah, of course, because that's what I grew up with, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so it's not about it's not about that. It's just the numbers.
I understand the numbers, but this is a reality. Just because you have that luxury and somebody else wants it, like, that is just also a desire that people have. And if you look at, for example, in a sale, oftentimes when we're looking to market and sell, we're looking to market and sell to the 3% of buyers who have an awareness of the problem. And the rest of the people have no awareness, have no understanding, have no knowing of what's going on. So it's easy to say that from a perspective of like, yeah, we should be knowing better, but people don't know better. People are operating at the unawareness level. And as a psychologist, like, people are so bombarded with so many different thoughts that they haven't had to think about it. And just because we grow up with those things and people want the same things, the luxury of having a refrigerator in their house to have fresh food, and to have a pet because it's much more like loving and fun. If you're also having those things, you're also supporting it. So I feel like I understand your argument, but I also understand, like, I can understand why somebody else would want it too, because not having those things is also an inconvenience. Yeah. So for me, it also boils down to, like, can we ask better quality questions where we can be like, how can we make more sustainable refrigerators? How can we make sure that we're not impacting the environment as we're creating more food, because people have a demand for that? And instead of like being angry like I feel like that's the wrong energy to be in when it comes to solving problems. Instead, it's like, how can we look at it differently? Because yeah, that's why it's easy to blame the past, but like we are where we are right now, and therefore as leaders, we need to think about how can we change the future to where we want it to be. And I think if you look at we're living today in a world where like we had like Bill Gates who wanted every house to have a computer. That was a crazy dream, and he did it, right? Now every household has that. Now that was someone else's vision. Now we're at this time where we can design our own vision for the future, and that might be having. That's the questions we have to come and ask, because like if we don't have those visions that are clear, then we cannot push the conversation very differently. And we're living in a world that somebody else designed, and like I think it's a pretty good world. Obviously, there's problems, but I want to live in an even better world, which is what I want to create.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
you're right.
about,
Like, talking about the pet food. Sorry, Joe, just quickly. Bugs, protein, creating pet food from that. It's not happening yet. It's a tiny little industry, right? So that sort of stuff. Pets. We need to be looking at how do we limit it, because it's become explosive, right? We don't need more animals that don't contribute. We don't need more humans that don't contribute, but we don't need more, right? We need to reduce. So, but that's not something we can talk about it, but it's something that the leaders of governments and the leaders of business need to start doing. And I'm not hearing those conversations in the industry. I was just reading today, like the offset of the emissions from the industries put money into whatever they put it in, banks, investments, blah, blah, blah. Just the emissions created off that. Have you guys seen this? Basically have doubled their emissions overnight. So companies like Google or Apple or Microsoft have all been working really hard to get their emissions under control. Well, where they store their money is actually doubling their emissions because it's being invested in fossil fuel industries, right? So there's some really big complex things going on around it, and we can speak up, but we need that global kind of consensus of we've got a problem, how do we fix it, which is part of what you were saying, Yasmine. And it's not about being negative, it's about when are we going to start having the conversations, because we're not at the right levels.
I was just going to come to the defense about the idea of not knowing, right? I mean, I know that we always think about it in terms of, well, we don't have an excuse. We don't have an excuse. I was a pretty thoughtful, 20-something-year-old as I got married, and I had my plans and ideas for how I'm going to raise my kids and this and that. I had all these really big ideas, and I kind of thought I knew everything. And for the most part, I think I did it pretty well. But there were a lot of things that happened along the way which I really didn't expect, right? And I don't think as many people as I think who become parents and also who are in business take it on as that huge everything thing that it actually is, right? I mean, if you're in business, few people think of themselves as people who are custodians of the environment. They think of themselves as the CEO of this company that produces this product, right? And what I'm hearing is that, we have to have that kind of. It would be much better if everyone in the world thought of themselves as custodians of the planet, where where we're using what we can to create what we need, but we're still aware of that role that we're custodians. So it's something that I mean, to me as a parent, did come quite late as well. I realized that, like now I look at the parenting I've done, and I went, okay, I did some things well, but I have missed out on some pretty crucial aspects, and I think I've screwed up my kids in certain ways. With all the best intentions, and there's also what you can undo, right? I mean, there's some things I can't undo with some of my kids. I can't make them suddenly feel okay with me because there's something that desperately needs to happen for that to kind of come around as well. So we're kind of stuck in this place. We're too far gone in some aspects. Like even as you try to fix the problem, you're going to be contributing to the problem. Like I think we talked about this before as well. The technology that we are trying to use to solve the problems by themselves, they're also the creation of these technologies is going to create some emissions and other stuff as well, which are going to be problematic, right? And then sometimes in the effort to solve the problem, we create problems that we didn't think we did. Like for instance, I learned about environmentally friendly laundry solutions, right? The idea that if you use the many ways that industry has been trying to, at least the so-called green industries are trying to come up with detergents that work with less chemicals and all the different aspects of things. And what they finally found was, and it's not universal for all detergent companies, but scientists who are working on detergents for the large companies were able to create environmentally less impactful detergents than the green ones. So the green, the people who are involved in the green message and want to do all the good in the world, they're putting out a product that actually is responsible for more output, more emissions than the ones that they say that they're replacing as well. So there is a lot to be said about unintended consequence and the stuff you don't know, right? I mean, just like a parent, I came up with some ideas which I thought were going to be great ideas, which have turned out a little bit differently.
Yeah, and we've got to allow that sort of transition through and mistakes, right? I saw a tweet the other day really criticizing AOC in the Green New Deal, basically saying it's naive and childish. And it's like, well, I don't think that's the right thing to say because, they fought for something that they really believed in and they put a conversation front and center that needed to be put front and center. And now we move forward from there, and it might not be enough, but it was a starting point that brought people with them, right? And, and so that whole sort of, what's the culture where you sort of block people? What's that called?
Canceling.
Yeah, the cancel culture, right? It's not useful. Because nobody knew where we were and how quickly this was all happening, and we need to give it. We just need to move forward together, right?
Well, listen, I'm a huge fan of Audacity, which is why we're doing this show, right? Because I know, and why I continue to want to do the show. I used to come from a background where I would have a very bad day if I felt that I was getting less than 300,000 people listening to the show. Now I'm okay with the idea of a handful of people watching and listening and getting something out of this, because this is what Audacity is about, right? It's about putting something out there which is maybe not as well known or as big a deal yet, but it could happen. And I think that's what we need more of. We need to be pushing it out there. And the thing that I've always talked about in terms of what I do, which is the presentation, coaching and stuff, right, is like, if you have a good idea, you can't just rely on the idea being good, right? You've got to be able to get that idea to other people and put it in the hands of other people so that it can move on to the next person. And, maybe the full callback is to BTS, right? I mean, the simple message put out there in a simple package that maybe looks pretty good as well, works.
Looks very good.
Yeah. Hey, Joe, you're super wise today. Anna, you've been a bit quiet for a while. Do you want to jump in?
Every now and again, I can do quiet. Some of this one is, I feel like there's need to be a mindfulness about me telling other people how to live their lives when I've benefited from a whole bunch of things. So I far more prefer the approach to, we've spent a massive amount of work in the last 20 years to lift people out of poverty. That is going to have a consequential interest in all the sorts of perks and privileges that my cultural background has been lucky enough to give me. So feel it's far more valid to ask, how do we create the quality of life possibilities, the infrastructure that gives these sorts of things, the technologies that allow an equivalent style of service that have a significantly lower physical footprint. Because that's actually the issue. It's like, it's not that there's more people on the planet, is that there's more people doing, I'm going to use the fat Western lifestyle. That's, this is really tragic. Another 100 million poor rice farmers doesn't do that much environmental damage. it's 100 million Western lifestyles that does a significant amount of damage. Now, I've benefited from a Western lifestyle, so I would so I'd be going, how, and this is where I think from business side and the business opportunities, because I have learned over the years, if we blame people, they do not get exactly the, King Bhumipol was amazing on that in Thailand, absolutely huge. And it was a real privilege when I lived there and saw him in action. So if we blame people, they don't go forward. If we're angry at them, they don't go forward. We work that one out with kids. But when we give people positive spaces to move forward, and we ask questions where it's like, okay, well, if you can solve that, you're doing a massive amount of good, both financially, because that's necessary for a business to prosper, and for other people. That co-joint world is far more likely to pop us through than telling people, well, you can't have refrigerants. What other technologies would be available or could become available that would allow a vast number of people to keep their food stored in a reliable way so it's not going to waste? I mean, that's a powerful question.
And then also, like, think about like the fact that keeping your food storage, how much economic power you have when you can actually not have to worry about your food going to waste and focus on other economic activities that can bring in more abundance for your family. So the luxuries that we have, like going back to Joanne's point, is not just the luxury of the refrigerator. It's a luxury of better quality of life, better job opportunities, being part of the economic cycle, which already the gap between the poor and the rich is insane. The fact that we have devices is one thing, but we have understanding of software technology is another thing as well. So yeah, totally with you, Joanne, on that point.
Yeah. So basically, the wealthy need to come down, and the poor need to come up, but we need to sort of get some sort of balance of it. My conversation when I mentioned the refrigerators isn't that everyone in the world should have a refrigerator. It's the refrigerator companies 20, 30, 40 years ago needed to go, okay, we're going to explode, and it's going to be a wonderful opportunity for our company. How do we do it in a way that's not going to have a negative impact on the environment? The fashion industry, the airline industry, they just kept building and building and making and selling and quarterly profits, and the short-term vision, and they've just done it, and it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and here we are. In March, Australia and America already superseded the planet. Within 3 months of the first of the year, they took more from the planet than it could give them back to support them, So anyway, moving on, Google engineer has basically, he's been put on leave or leave of absence after he claimed that the AI program has gone sentient. Did you guys have a chance to have a look at that one? Because I thought it was cool, and it's getting a fair bit of coverage. Yeah. This is my reaction to the story. And this is a message to all technology companies. We don't believe you anymore. You've lost our trust. So I think Google needs to handle this very, very, very carefully. And from a communications point of view, they need to recognize the deep lack of trust that we have in the message of those companies, because these are the companies that let social media go nuts, right? And they need to be really transparent. I reckon they need to partner with this guy, because if he's got genuine concerns, then we need to know about it too. Because if AI is sentient, then is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? We don't know, but it can't be behind closed doors anymore. So if they want to get our trust again, it's got to be an open, transparent approach.
Well, okay, so that's the challenge that they have, because they're a technology company as well, and technology is always about being getting an edge or having an edge over the competition. So part of the business is secrecy, I'm afraid. I mean, it is the edge, or it's what protects or at least incentivizes the progress, right? Because if all you're doing is, as soon as you come up with something or whatever it is, you release it and it's not protected, there's going to be an issue. So it's hard for companies to just say, I'm going to put everything out there. And but the question of whether or not we have a sentient AI, I kind of feel it's a good thing, and this is said with a lot of some trepidation as I say it, because it has the potential of going wrong, and that's always going to be the problem. Because if you have an AI, and this is the biggest challenge I think it will have, is that if we have an AI that is sentient and it's learning from its environment, we need to survive the teenage years, because we kind of, you have to remember what we were when we thought we knew everything, when we were younger and we knew fewer things, right? So if you have an AI like that, just imagine something with the ability to learn as fast and to give and get that feedback from itself. It's going to have to go through this growth stage that I'm particularly worried about. You know, if we can figure a way for an AI to become sentient and learn and be very quick and in isolation for at least the first few years, and figure a way that we can get them to the wise part of being an AI, that would be interesting. But would you then end up with a very, inexperienced, unworldly sort of AI, which gives you very bad advice and comes with very, very naive ideas? We'll see. But I for one, actually, I'm looking forward to the world of AI, because I do feel that we're in a world where, I mean, we won't ask anyone to mention names, but if I asked you about, at least name me 5 people that you know that should be replaced by an AI, you probably have answers.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I'm not complaining about technology. It's not about that, and we're not going to get out of it. It's part of our life, right? But I do think that some lessons have been learnt in the last decade about technology, and you're talking about the competitive advantage, of course, but something like AI, I think it needs to be,
it's dangerous.
It is, and in the wrong hands. And the EU is putting all sorts of new rules in place, and the most advanced rules in the world, which of course will then potentially ripple out around the world. But there's always going to be actors in countries that are going to use it for different things, like surveillance. Before you even commit a crime, that sort of stuff, where you can be arrested even though you haven't committed a crime, which the whole free will argument comes into the equation. But I just think it's something that we need to be very careful about. I was watching the Terminator movie with I think it was the third one, when the nuclear bomb goes off, and what's the cloud platform, its name? And I was just watching it and went, oh, okay, this is that. Where it takes over, and look, at the end of the day, if that's what happens, I don't care, because we're so bloody stupid anyway. We're letting our world go down the toilet. So, it's like, if that's
I think in terms of oversight, I choose to believe that there is some oversight that's there, but I think the state of technology is further along than we, the average person, knows. It's probably closer to something that's been written in sci-fi already, because that's always been the way things have been, right? I mean, sci-fi writes the future, and very often it's just the present. So I think there's a certain aspect of that going on, and I do feel that there's a value in some secrecy, in the sense that it may not be the companies themselves that are just responsible for the secrecy, but I think governments are probably involved in that. Because if I was in government, I would have to try and figure out how to make that how to keep that under wraps. Because if the private sector was developing electronic sentient life, I would militarily, economically, for the various reasons, I would want to have my finger on that pulse. And I might not want it to be public knowledge. I think, for instance, if Google really has got this technology that's something that as good as that, the fact that you put it out there and say that it is there now makes it the thing that you want to steal the most, right? If you're someone who has nefarious intentions, that's the target, and that's the thing that I want to have right now. Even if it's just a matter of curiosity, I'd love to see it myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about quantum computing, which is a whole other layer, right? So anyway, we're going into some interesting territory, but I don't think the technology industry is doing, and most technology starts with the government and the defense industry before it moves into the commercial space, where it gets developed and commercialized, right? So, but anyway, in Brazil, we saw that the journalists and the environmentalists were officially by the end of the week, we found out that they were killed by. So the journalist's name was Dom Phillips, and the environmental expert was Bruno Pereira. So I don't know if you've been watching this story. It was a very, very confusing story this week. So first of all, there were headlines, they were found dead. And then you go into the bottom of the article and they weren't found dead. They hadn't been found at all. Anyway, apparently towards the end of this week, it was confirmed they absolutely have been found dead. And one of the people that's been accused actually took them to the bodies. So we've had more than 200 environment activists killed around the world in the last year. And on average, we're around about 50 journalists a year being killed, which, of course, neither is okay, right? Bolsonaro is being blamed now, which I think is absolutely fair enough, because he's allowed, uncontrolled deforestation going on in the Amazon. But also the words that he uses encourages hate. And, we've seen that with Trump, Boris Johnson, Morrison. I just hope that we wake up and realise that we've got to stop voting for these ugly, horrible, divisive people, because we see the damage they're doing. But I thought that was quite sad that those two who were doing good work in the world passed away. So, were murdered.
Yeah.
Is it terrible that my mind went straight away to thinking about how we don't ever feel that badly about gossip columnists who are murdered in a similar way?
Yeah. I actually wonder how many gossip columnists do get murdered. They're characters maybe, but whether their physical lives are at risk in the way that people who stand up, say, for an environment, which goes against the interests of certain big businesses and certain government entities and communities too, for that matter, because it does sound like in the end with this particular situation, it sounds like it was partly a community response. Whereas at one stage, the media was thinking that it could actually be a company-based one. So it's...
Yeah, it's one of the most dangerous areas of the Amazon, with, ancient tribes and, all sorts of stuff going on, and illegal logging. And, I think it'll be a while before we get to the bottom of that. All right, so famine and drought, we're obviously, we're in a bit of a crazy place in the world. There's a bunch of reads in my weekend reads, but Portugal has now, for the very first time, hit 97% drought. So I've been talking to my friends in Portugal about that. But a friend of mine recently introduced me to this publication called the Byline Times. And the title is The World Faces a Decade of Global Hunger That Could Irreversibly Degrade Humanity's Prospects. So I think, Anna, you were talking about how we've brought a lot of people up out of poverty, but actually in the last couple of years, a lot more people have gone back into poverty, and those numbers are growing. It really makes the point that there's a lot of media that are focused on the Russia-Ukraine war as the reason for the global famine, but that's not actually correct. It's just a trigger. But what I found really interesting is in 2012 there was a study done by one of the authors of the IPCC reports. And basically, it was predicting that within 10 years, so now, large parts of Asia responsible for producing much of the world's wheat and maize would experience serious droughts. And they used 12 different climate models to come up with this conclusion. Basically, after the early 2020s, droughts across Asia would last longer, and the countries most impacted would be China, Pakistan, and Turkey, as well as obviously India, which would be impacted the worst. And basically, this has started, and what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, it's like a little bit of the safety net in the mix, that those countries wouldn't be in drought. So we're seeing this playing out. But then this other bit talks about a simulation, where in 2016 the US military did a simulation of what a food chain reaction would look like. And that's basically expanding drought conditions, food prices would spike by 395%. And it goes through like exactly what we're seeing now. This was not a prediction. It was exploring the worst possible case scenario. And what we're seeing today is exactly what that scenario was playing out. So I thought that was a really interesting piece. Did you have a look at the Byline Times one? It wasn't a very well written piece.
That was written in UN Babel, which is But like any professional field, it's a different way of putting your argument in conversation. So it's not one that's easy for the outside world to digest. But my takeaway when I was trying to decipher and it was that it's not that it's irreversible, but we're certainly not. We're going quite a long way down a pathway. The consequences are really not very attractive.
So you still don't think it? You think we haven't hit irreversible yet? I think we're past it a long time ago.
I think it depends. I think it depends on which parts of the system and where you want to give up hope.
I'm not giving up hope. I'm just being realistic. But I think, just from what I'm saying, it's just like, because once you hit that temperature, then these things happen, and once you hit that temperature, these things happen.
There's a whole series of dominoes.
And it's already starting. So once they start, there's got to be a global reshuffle. I mean, like this report, 2012.
Yeah.
Things like maize, wheat. It's going to be too hot to grow where it's currently growing.
Yeah.
So where do we need to move it to so that we don't face a famine? We need to move it to land that can sustain the growth, which needs certain temperatures and that sort of thing.
Well, there's been a lot of the agricultural science-based organizations, because this has exactly been, these trajectories have been out there. And so they've been looking at how do you reduce water needs? What kind of, is it varieties or production methodologies that will reduce water needs? Because that's a constraint. More heat tolerant is another one. And then it gets into how do you get those particular varieties out to those particular farms and places that actually will be able to sustain and do it. So it's not that people have been ignoring it. There's parts of the system are in play. The question is, will their insights be strong enough to help deal with that while other action is taken to reduce the amount of contribution that's adding to the heating issues?
Yeah. But there's one of the stories, I think, we've seen one of the farmers, right? 5 generations of farmers. And they're the first generation to be dealing with heat, which means that they can't grow their crops.
Mm-hmm.
So 10 years ago, did their government say where you are isn't going to be sustainable to build your farm, to secure your farm in the long term? Do we need to look at relocating your farm up north so that you can continue? Those sort of conversations. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, see, I love those sorts of conversations. But I suppose the challenging question is, we've got human beings still building houses and manufacturing on floodplains.
Yeah.
It's just sort of because it's convenient and easy, and there isn't necessarily the wealth to go build it elsewhere. So there's that, and I come from a part of the world where we've had big issues in controlling use of forest and managing reforestation. And you have foresters who are going, it's 4 generations of us have been doing this. Why can't we hack down trees?
Yeah.
But now we have to learn a new career. And I had to admit, coming from an earlier background in technology where we had to retrain every couple of years if we wanted to stay in a job, I'm just going, join the modern world, sunshine. And someone said I wasn't being terribly empathetic. And I was like, I am. But the reality is lots of people have to being forced to make fundamental shifts in how they create their income. We see it day in and day out in some industries like technology. So it's normalized as part of it. And there are some other fields and industries that are having that kind of, the way we've done it in the past is not going to be the way that's going to have us thriving in the future. And it's a big shift. I mean, and it's not easy.
The wine industry in Australia, right?
Yeah.
But, they moved to Tasmania, and they've been growing crops in Tasmania and they think that will be the last wine growing region on the planet. Like the French wineries will be gone. It's going to be in Tasmania. So surely the land.
I better go buy some property.
But surely, exactly right. People aren't thinking about that. Look, just a couple of quick things before we move into Yasmine's section. So my sister sent me a tweet today, and it says, in 2014, this French weather presenter announced a forecast for August 18th, 2050 as part of a campaign to alert the reality of climate change. Now her forecast that day is the actual forecast for the coming 4 or 5 days in mid-June 2022. So like one of the things that kind of really sort of spun me around at the beginning, sort of back in February, was scientists saying we were not expecting what is happening in the environment to happen until 2050, right? And we've talked about this before, Joe, but that was probably the thing that made me go, oh, you know, because I know what's expected, right? So I just found this is really, really interesting insight. Another piece that I think is well worth everyone's time, and there's many, many more in the environment section, pollen and heat, a looming global challenge for agriculture. So basically, the unusually high springtime temperatures can kill pollen and interfere with the fertilization of crops. So we're doing everything we can. Everyone's paying attention to the bees, but you know, the pollens are pretty important part of that, and they're trying to create heat tolerant pollens to make sure. But basically at around 90 degrees, the proteins that power a pollen's grains metabolism start to break down. So this to me is a pretty big story in the mix.
90 degrees Fahrenheit, Celsius. I'm just
obviously Fahrenheit. Yeah, I didn't have time to. It's probably what 30, 32 Celsius, 90 degrees.
Probably
it's a nice
38.
temperature. 38. No, hundreds up in the sort of 40s.
I will go. Excuse me while I go and do a bit of Google Maths.
Yeah, we saw some pretty crazy flooding in Yellowstone National Park this week. There's plenty more stuff in the 200,000 homes have been and businesses are at risk of rising sea levels in the UK. There's lots going on, but I wanted to hand it over to Yasmine, and then we can cover anything else that we've got time for. Sales and doubt. Are you ready to have a chat?
Dubious us.
You're in a hotel room, right, Yasmine?
I'm in an Airbnb, yeah.
Yeah, right. So you're not in your usual environment, which is why she's moving around. But yeah, so sales and doubt. So do you want to give us your thoughts, and we'll have a conversation about it?
Yeah. So I think I start off by like kind of defining how I look at a sale, because oftentimes people have this conceived notion of what it is. But for me, a sale is an authentic conversation to help someone achieve what they truly wanted to achieve. And it's just about helping them elevate where they are to where they want to go. Now, the reason why we have a sale is because oftentimes, if you have somebody stuck in a way they're seeing the world, they cannot get out unless they have some sort of a transformation. And a sale for me is just a transaction towards achieving that transformation. So when I have that definition of what a sale is like that, I realize, okay, why is it that many people don't actually get what they want in this world? Why is it that when it comes to their final time on earth, they have so many regrets? And it's because they didn't take those decisions to make those sales for themselves, whether it's, working with certain people or investing in certain software or whatever it may be. And that's where I realized a big part of where the opportunity lies in understanding where doubt is, and doubt from two perspectives: doubt from the person who's selling, and doubt from also the person who's receiving that message, for them to be able to transform to what they want to get to.
So when you're talking about sales, you're talking about it from a completely different context, not just the traditional idea of what sales is, right? Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. So for me, like, the reason why we buy things is because in some deeper level, we want something that we don't have. Maybe, for example, we want a nicer house, we want a refrigerator on the context of this whole conversation today, or we want a puppy, whatever it may be. Or we're in a business and we want to be able to have more commercial results. Or we are afraid of what's happening legally, and we need to work with Joanne to help have advisory on how to be more sustainable as leaders, right? So there's many different aspects that we are going to be having to buy into. But essentially what we're buying into is always that we have this pain point that has to be resolved. And a lot of times, even though we have to resolve it, or we need to resolve it, or we want to resolve it, one of the many different options that you have at the table, what gets in the way is limitations. If it's an individual, people will use limitations like, financial, it might be time, it might be that it won't work for me. In a business context, you might say, oh, it's the board member's permission, or whether it's I have to get permission from the procurement department or whatever it is. So we blame it to somebody else to have more power, or we use budget. But if somebody wants something, budget somehow appears. Don't you think it's a matter of reward, effort, and reward? I don't get where that question comes from, which context, Denise. So maybe you can reframe it.
The more effort you put in, the more reward you get, right?
Yeah, but I think that's like, if you have that argument, meaning if it's good enough now to put the effort, it's not worth it. Well, if you're having the effort and you have that belief that if you work really hard, you'll get what you want to achieve, you can find a lot of people in this world today who work really hard, who don't have results that they should be getting. So I find this belief that you have to work really hard to get something, something that we have been trained on. It's an industrial kind of thought pattern that we've had to learn that isn't actually something that makes sense if you want to have certain results.
Because the people who work the hardest are often the people at the bottom of the economy, not the people at the top of the economy, right?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
Especially the physical, grueling labor. So yeah, I get that. Yeah.
So the whole idea of thinking like, oh, I have to work harder, like, yeah, that's nice, but like, you don't have to work harder to get many things.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay, so the doubt side, how to because it's so wide what you're talking about now, right? So I mean, maybe give us a couple of examples of like a character example.
Okay. So let's say, for example, let's have a simple example. Let's say you have somebody who wants to lose weight, right? And they maybe had a baby, they've gained 15 kilos, and they want to go back to their pre-pregnancy weight, right? That is not my desire. That is their desire. Let's call her Janet. Janet wants to lose 15 kilos to get to her pre-pregnancy weight, right? So that is what she wants. Now, what ends up happening is she may meet different people. She may meet Andrea, who promotes like eating intuitively. She might meet Joe, who's a personal trainer. She might meet Joanne, who is talking about this new gadget that sells whatever, right? So what Janet wants is to lose 15 kilos. That is something that is not any of us' opinion. That's what she wants. But in the end of the day, she might go to Andrea and think, this intuitive eating thing, that sounds great, but it works for Andrea. It won't work for me. And the moment she has that it won't work for me, you've lost that sale because you didn't make her feel at any single point of time that it would work for her. She does not feel at any point of time intuitive eating works for everyone. Intuitive eating is easy to learn. Intuitive eating, something that can get results fast. Then you've lost her because she had an element of doubt. And that's where you look at like messaging and like narrative building. There's multiple levels of the narrative building. If you look at Joe, for example, as Janet's potential personal trainer, he might have so much proof to make her eliminate doubt. He might have had lost that weight himself, you know, like for his wife. He supported his wife to lose that weight. He may have been overweight his life and he lost it himself. He may have had 1,000 clients who've lost weight, were also overweight like she was. So again, like it's always about like helping people like move through that self-doubt for A, the seller, someone who's selling, and also for B, for herself as a buyer who wants to also buy as well. And for me, that's where the sale happens. The sale happens when you let somebody actually like jump into what's possible for what they want, for themselves, for their organization, or whatever it is, because they finally understand that they can also have it too.
But also the word sale you're using isn't even traditional, right? So you're talking about the intuitive eating example for me, right? That's more of a it's not a you're calling it a sale, but it's not. It's a do they believe
there
in what
actually
I have
is
to
intuitive
say?
eating coaches who exist on the internet.
I'm sure there
tell
are.
you how to, and they have courses all around intuitive eating. So but that's like a vehicle to us to achieve the results. So like I just gave a really ridiculous one, but there's people who spend a lot of money in that industry, and it's growing because they believe it would work for them, which is fine. But the reality is whatever you're selling is helping someone overcome that doubt in you, and then secondly, the second layer that's more important is a doubt in themselves. That's why for me, like sales is actually a very spiritual practice, because you're literally helping change how people see their world and helping them get there because they believe more in themselves when they make those transactions.
All right. So can we take it from a individual trying to lose weight through a B2B sale, $1 million CRM system?
Beautiful. I love that example. So if you look at a Millionaire CRM system, a lot of times what ends up happening is you have companies who are perhaps still using Excel, right? There are many B2B companies till today, which is for me shocking how you choose that option, who have people manually putting an update on a spreadsheet. Now, you might have, for example, and I've actually had a client who's had this example, so I'm telling you from experience. They had a specific client in Thailand who was selling farm equipment. So for them, they were thinking, you know, we're old, we're an old-fashioned company. We don't have to have a CRM. And also a CRM that you can actually tap into and update on your phone as you're on the move, that's too complicated for our people. And a CRM that connects to the marketing, that's too complicated for our people. So even though it would make their lives easier and it's not require them to come back, report, write pieces of paper, you know, update the spreadsheet, there is a massive thing is like, oh, my company is not technically friendly. Or my company is going to have a hard time with change management because people don't want to change to having this technology in our company. And we see that on a macro level because you end up having like not one person doubt, you have huge amount of doubts. So we end up being afraid of change, and we use that as examples of why it won't work for us. And the problem is when you are like trying to sell someone an idea, if you underestimate their feeling of doubt on that collective level, like the CRM for the farmers in Thailand, and it's like, oh, it'll work for you. The other person is like, no, it isn't. And then you lose the sale because you haven't helped them understand that I'm going to hold your hand as we transform from an old-fashioned Excel company to a farming company of the future. And that whole notion of helping them transition and holding them and being graceful for them and patient with them is what will help you get that sale versus being under considerate and pushing someone for something where you may get them as a client, but you won't keep them as a client because at any point of time, they still haven't been able to buy in that would be possible for them and for their organization.
What I like about the way Yasmine works when she's doing this, because I've been privileged enough to have worked with her in several different ways on it, is to me she introduces the concept of, instead of a sale being a push at and it, you know, yes, it will work for you, which is in essence me putting my viewpoint and dominating the other person, is having the empathy of understanding of the doubts and concerns that person will have, and creating a space for them to step into another possibility, which is where then the points of the stories are, is to give people that space to see where they could be and the possibilities for themselves. So it's quite a different dynamic, but the starting point is acknowledging that there's going to be doubts in them looking at us, and doubts in who they are and their ability to take on the journey.
Yeah, no, it's really funny that I use that example that you could speak to, and that wasn't planned at all. So that was kind of cool, because I used to work with the CRM team at Microsoft, and there was some really interesting things going on. But the ability to understand where the customer is right now, the Thai farmer, right? Where 10 years ago, the Thai farmers didn't necessarily have mobile phones. Now everyone's got one. But 10 years ago, I think we forget, especially in Asia, the developing markets around Asia, especially in the jobs like farming, that technology wasn't in people's hands. So that's all part of the transition. But understanding where the people are, not the person who's going to sign the check, the people are going to use the technology. Because of course, then I saw examples where they didn't do the right job. I'm not talking about the guys I work with, but there was one fantastic example where the guy I was working with won back a customer that he lost because the company that went in didn't do the right job and make the technology successful with the customer. So then they eventually came back to him and said, you can help us do this. So actually it wasn't selling. It was his ability to make the technology successful that was what the business actually needed. So consultative selling, right, which is supposedly being, it's been positioned for the last sort of 4 or 5 years. That's the selling of the future. But we're still, it's still not happening, but because the idea of sales is still so traditional, right?
And the reason why, and this is something I stand very strongly for, is sometimes the sale takes a little bit longer because you have to be sensitive to someone's needs. And I give you the example of this. When I did my degree in psychology, we did a class on health psychology. And in that class, we talked about when you go to a doctor, how much time you have until you feel comfortable to speak to the doctor, tell the doctor your problems, and get the results. And according to studies, they found it takes 22 minutes when you go and see a doctor to feel that level of comfort. Now, today, when we go into a doctor's meeting, if you're lucky, you get 3 minutes. It's because we have so much demand on doctors and not enough physicians right in the market. So the issue that why it's not happening in the sales world is because of the same thing. We're trying to squeeze people for targets that may not happen in 90 days. It might happen in like 6 months. But because it's so pushed for that quarterly target, people can't have that space to give their client a space to listen. And as a result of that, you end up having quick sales and very pushy tactics because people have targets to hit, or they'll lose their jobs. And for me, I understand both sides of the spectrum, and I get it. You have to also have those targets. But if you want to become that partner of the future, you need to also have that space to make someone feel comfortable, because it might take you 6 months to 18 months to get that client. But if you've done that work correctly, you have a client for life, because you've helped them overcome that level of doubt that they didn't think was possible for them, and you've helped them have that win. It becomes very hard for them to shift to somebody else who is looking for that quick return and a quick transaction.
Anna, did you see Danase's question?
Yeah, I did. So, Danesa, the thing is, what I've found in working with organizations, large and small, and people from all different shapes of professions and business and life, none of us like being told what to do. So if it's just one of those things. We didn't like it when our parents told us what to do, and as adults, we still don't like it. Not one of those things that seems to change as we get older. But if we take the time, and this is what I like about what Yasmine is talking about that or doubt. Like, for example, yes, if we give people the space to walk into, it's not about giving them a one-sided point of view. Sometimes it's about giving them a multi-dimensional point of view, or the space to explore that, for them to go, you know what, I like that other position better. So, for example, yesterday I was speaking with a group of executives on GreenSight on the responsibilities company directors have, and just some of the and I'm not going to go into it in depth here because that's not the point of this conversation. But we've been talking very factually about the different sorts of legal responsibilities the directors could be facing and the risks, and therefore them as leaders in the businesses, some of the things they might like to be talking about. And then afterwards, I had a one-on-one with one of the women in the room. And she asked a particular question. And I said, look, you need to also appreciate the people who are listening to you in the industry you're in. When you talk about this, they're going to be worried about whether they still have a job in a few months or in a year or two. And so they're listening to you with fear for their family, for a roof over their head, for food on the table, for their kids' school fees. And if you're not aware of that, you can't connect to help them move forward. And to me, the sense of understanding where people are, Yasmine talks about the doubt. Then afterwards, she said back to the entire group, she goes, you know what? I realized I need to have more empathy with the other people that I'm talking with. And, that's the piece. It's not about a one-sided point of view. It's often about a significantly increased level of empathy, but also being aware as if you've got another data set, give them the invitation of seeing what else is possible. And sometimes that possibility will be a pain relief. Sometimes it will be something that's significantly attractive.
Yeah.
And then, as Andrew's often talking, have the kindness to honor them as a human being and their ability to make the choice.
Yeah. So the other one is as a seller, how willing is one not to make the sale, even though it might not be beneficial in the long run? And that was almost like, I can't tell you the amount of times I went into a meeting and I sort of said, right, what's the problem you're trying to overcome? And then I said, well, what I've got to sell isn't right, but I can recommend this, right? I find that and sales is not my thing. I've done it a few times. I don't really like it, but the best sellers I've ever worked with all have that approach. And also with social media, by the time you actually get to a meeting with the client, the education has already taken place about the solution you've got to offer, and they're just trying to make the final decision. So I think that sort of shifted the whole sales conversation anyway. But I wouldn't sell, something that somebody doesn't want, right?
No, but also like the thing is, like, if you look at accelerating trust, when you help a client figure out if this is the right or the wrong solution for them, you have a different level of like clout because you are that authority. And I think today's age where people are like not doing that takes courage and bravery. And people don't forget that. I have still till today referrals from people who I never worked with, because I said, I don't think this is the right fit for your team. And then they're like, what? I'm like, I think this might be a better focus area for where you are right now. And that, permission to let them realize, hey, from what you're telling me, this might not be the right course of action, and I'm okay to walk away from money on the table. That puts such a respect that somebody has in front of you versus like, hey, I want that right now. Because I don't want to have like a one-off client. I want to have clients for a long time. And I'm very grateful to have those clients because I tell them, hey, this might be not the right area for you, or this might not be working out. And can we work together? Can we improve that solution? And so forth. So it does take a lot of bravery, but I think it's also the shift of this very conservative, traditional way of how sales was, which was important back in the day because it was literally designed to knock on people's doors to sell them at their doorstep. And today we don't. Today we have a conversation online. Today we have clients that are much more aware and much more educated before you go and meet them. And I love the example of the doctor as well. I use always the doctor analogy in how I teach, is that when you go and see a doctor for a chronic illness, the patient oftentimes knows more than the doctor about the latest trends because they're studying for their damn life. And the doctor is just telling you what's the right procedure and so forth based on his or her limited knowledge. So we need to understand that today it's a two-way conversation. And the more you forget that, the more you realize that you're going to lose out because somebody else will be selling a different solution, maybe even worse than you, because they understand that they will get that sale.
Yeah. So Joe, you're going to say something?
I'm struck by the way this conversation works for things. I think where people know what they need and know what they already know what they need to do, and they already sold on the idea themselves. And what you're doing is you're matching their internal conversation.
Actually, I wouldn't say that. I would say actually a big part of that sale is helping them understand what they need, because oftentimes when they come to you, they have a rough idea. They don't actually know what they need.
Yeah,
I reckon there are 95% of the decisions being made by the time they come to you.
Joe?
Yeah, no, but I was thinking in terms of what we're trying to do. I think with the story of the environment, for instance, right? I think there's several aspects to it. One is about how this it has to come across something that's easy to do. So I did a talk once for CPA Australia, and the name of the talk was what honest people can learn from con men, right?
Love it.
Because if you think about a category of salesperson, the very, very best of the con artists are those that basically have sold you something you don't want, and then when they talk to other people about it, they speak of you as a genius, right? The trick that's necessary, I think, is for enough people to misunderstand the problem as an easy problem. To go like, I'll put it this way. Like, for instance, with from Andrea's point of view, it's easy to be environmentally friendly. It is easy to be environmentally friendly, but for a lot of people, it's not. you feel like it's an impossible task. You feel that it's you feel the guilt, the challenge, you feel there's a lot of contradiction. You think about being environmentally friendly, and you think, like, I really love meat. I drive a car. I've got all kinds of things that make you a bad person, even from this idea that you think of what you want to do. And I think there has to be a way for it to come across and go, like, it's really easy to be environmentally friendly. We can figure this out. And I think once, and the reason why I'm thinking this process through is once someone is sold an idea and they turn themselves, they're now not pushing on the way out. They're not facing you and pushing this way. They're actually on the inside pushing in, on the inside pushing out. They begin to sell themselves. They begin to do the things that they need to do because they've now stated that they're on the side of it and they want to do something about that, right? So, like I think for Joanna, if you've probably been in a situation where there are many corporates who go like, it just can't be done. It's too many sacrifices and this and that. But if they can flip around and go like, there's so many advantages and it's actually quite easy to do, suddenly they begin to brainstorm on that side of it rather than figure out the ways it can't be done. So I think there is room for the environmental con artist, so to speak, the benevolent con artist who's going in there to convince everyone that it's actually a lot easier than we're doing it. That the people who make it look like this huge struggle maybe are acting. And it should be just seen as a more normal thing to do. It's actually easier than we think. I think if we can figure a way for people to not feel paralyzed by the stuff that they do, which is wrong, so that they can do the stuff that is going to help as well at the same time, you'll get more done. I think what happens now, there's a lot of stuff which holds us back. Like I it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation for me to have because I'm still doing this. And if you can get past that and go like, you know what, I am still going to recycle while I have a steak for dinner. That's going to be okay.
We need billions of people acting imperfectly, because the system is not in place to support a green life. Like buying shampoo, you can't buy sustainable shampoo other than, stuff that's just crap. So, what do you do, right? So we just need billions imperfectly acting and not judging each other. Like I'm going to be flying soon, right? And people are going to go, you should be flying. Well, hello. I've done everything I can not to fly. I've said no to flights for business meetings. I said, no, we'll do it virtually. I'm limiting it as much as I can, but I can't not fly. But the criminal there isn't me. It's the aerospace industry that's been raking in the billions of dollars and selling more and more and more planes and not designing sustainable planes. So they need to get to work so that we can travel sustainably, because I live in Thailand, my family live in Australia, Steve's family live in the UK, and we need to see each other because we haven't seen each other for 3 years, right? So that guilt message is wrong. And, I eat red meat, not very often, but I do. But I try and get it from Thailand to make sure I'm not shipping something in from around the world. None of us are perfect. None of us.
Joanna, you were saying?
I was going to say, any entrepreneurs listening right now, there's an opportunity in the shampoo space. but this is the thing. But
the supermarkets need to change, right?
Yeah, but so the thing is, instead of diving in and going but, every time we have the conversation where the but comes in, we're putting the block. If instead we see it and we go, okay, that's not there. Okay, opportunity for someone to solve a problem over there. Okay, how do we get the space in the shelves so we can get there? Now, it may be that entrepreneurially, there's a whole bunch of products that get developed or iterated to be at merchandisable quality, i.e., we can wash our hair and it comes back out and it's feeling great and good. And then you go and take it to some of the big companies who have the distribution and say, here we have it. How do we partner up? One of the things that I see happening as one of the unexpected groundswells in the over the next decade of business is businesses saying we have to partner differently and solve problems differently and create opportunities differently. And those that do are the ones that are going to come out ahead in the same way that those companies that adopted IT and digitization back 15 years ago tended to be in a far better space than those who were slower to the game.
Yeah.
Those that pick up these practices, they're not going to get it all right. They're going to get things wrong, but they're going to be further ahead than those that don't. So it's the...
I don't know.
Hear the button, Andrea. Hear the button and go, "How's it solved?" Rather than
No. Look. To me, it's like, okay. So the supermarket example, right? Okay. Every single time I walk into a supermarket, I feel this rage, right? And it's not about getting a bit of space for sustainable shampoo. It's about transforming the entire supermarket and the supply chain. So when I go in, I take my can of deodorant. There's a tank and it goes a hole into my can. I put it in, I fill the can up, and I pay for that so that I can use my deodorant when I get home. It needs a complete and utter transformation of the industry, and I have not seen it anywhere. You get the refill shops in Singapore, which are very high end, but as a mainstream, like every single person walking into a shop to buy stuff, it's practically has been unchanged. And in fact, if anything, it's gotten worse. You go into the 7-Elevens here, you can buy these single-use sort of beauty products this big, all in plastic. How the hell did that ever happen? All these top brands, they're getting worse. They're not actually getting better. So for me, it's when you say the but is, I know, but I'm not the person that's going to solve redesigning supermarkets and the supply chain and how we buy products. I'm not that person, but I want it done. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I've asked the right question, but I'm not the person to solve it. I need the industry to solve it, because systemic change is the only thing that's going to change what we need to have changed, right? A few changes in that sentence.
If you went with what would help and what would be a useful way of living your life, you have basically Steve Jobs when he was going through the phase when he wasn't having showers and going around bare feet and smelling bad. There's some things which are really good for the environment, but we don't generally like it as much, right? I mean that's something that we have to kind of grapple with as well, and that's always going to be the challenge. And what needs to happen is we need to market that alternative as well. That's the thing that has to happen. It just can't occur to someone. And so, like, what's happened with appearing without makeup now in magazines, or having to have notices that say this is a photo retouched image, those kinds of things. It had to come from a kind of marketing, but whether it was an intentional move by someone or it became a movement that arose from a consciousness rising, it had to be, I think, actively sort of pushed and actively made fashionable. So I think you have all these people throughout history who have pushed environmental concerns, animal rights concerns, and some people have been successful because they've done it in a way which is kind of, it kind of worked. You have different levels of success. You have the Joan Baez's, Joni Mitchell's, and or Bob Dylan, right? They all had their different way or different levels of success with the communication that they were able to use. That's the kind of stuff I always talk about. Our art is going to be a very significant part of solving the world's problems. I think it really is up to the artists. I mean, you really have to figure out, and for art, most people who have large concerns about the world actually think about it from a very intellectual perspective. They're thinking about it from the facts, from the data, and all that kind of stuff, right? But what causes the action is going to be the feeling. You have to get that feeling going. You have to have people feeling that they have to do something, and then they'll do something.
I like Janice is just asking the question here: how to convince industry and sustain growth and positive change? How to achieve this? So a classic example is Coca-Cola came out a couple of years ago and said, the biggest single-use plastic polluter in the world, right? So stop putting Coke in plastic bottles. It seems pretty simple, and then they're like, but our customers like their Coke in plastic bottles. I don't care, because those plastic bottles are ending up in the ocean and they're ending up on our beach, and we've got thousands of people out every weekend cleaning up this crap that has nowhere to go apart from being turned into Christmas decorations through the precious plastic machines, right? And it's like this broken cycle. And the fast-moving consumer goods, I see, I've got lots of friends who are quite really senior, and they're sending out all these sustainability messages, but there's still the same products on the shelf. So what are you doing? What are you doing that's different, And like to Denise's question, I mean, those businesses and those industries have to come together and say, right, okay, we're not getting this right. So what are we going to do about it?
So I think what happens.
It's the only way. We can't fix this. As individuals cannot fix this. We can try and shop sustainably. We can try. That's what you were talking about earlier, the whole guilt. Like the individual guilt and, the carbon footprint, that's marketing to make us feel guilty. We can't change this. We need to be able to walk out into the world and we can reduce our impact and reduce our lifestyle and reduce what we buy and eat less meat, red meat and all that sort of stuff. But when the basic things, when we go out into the world, remain unchanged, how we have to work so much harder and it's so much more expensive and people have got less money now than they've had. So it's like the system isn't supporting us changing. We're trying to drive the change, but the system needs to change so that we can be part of that. Sorry. Yeah.
Bring on sustainable planes.
Well, yeah, I mean, but Airbus isn't expected to do that until 2030. I used to work with aerospace engineers, the smartest people in the world. What the hell have they been doing for the last 20 years? Honestly, what have they been doing? They could do anything. They are, it's the top grade to get into university is an aerospace engineer. They're brilliant. What have they been doing? Well, they've been run by companies like Boeing, who are all about making profits. And they're moving their headquarters, moving away from their engineering roots to the, being a financial sort of focus company, right? You can see it. It's all there in front of us. We've just got our eye off the ball completely. But, 2030s. So what are we supposed to do? Are we all going to stop flying? That'd be the best thing. But look at us. We live, I mean, Joe, your family's probably close, but our families are a long way away. I mean, Annie, you just had to make a rush to Tassie for your stepdad, right? If something happens to our parents, we've got to go. We've got to get on a plane. But and all these business people are jumping back on planes and flying everywhere, and you're like, really? Your company's not at least minimizing that bit because that's a good way to get your numbers down. So.
Well, here's the thing, right? I mean, if you look across business, we want to have a world where business says instead of money is the most important thing, something else is the most important thing. That's not going to happen, right? We have.
Well, you do have that, Joe. You have the B Corp movement where they think about money as well as impact. And what I find fascinating with the B Corp movement is it's growing.
I'm not saying that there's nobody who wants to do something and prioritize something else. But in terms of business in general, right? It's even if someone is saying that we put something else above all that as a company, essentially its own survival and all that, it's going to be whatever is the most important thing in terms of commerce, and I think that happens to be money. But I think what we're looking at now is what is close to that in terms of the second level, just next to that, and there's no doubt in my mind that leaders know something needs to be done. But what leaders are going to do is they're going to do what is the most viable or the easiest thing that can be done. And that's unfortunately the way how human beings tend to do it, right? We don't always just, we have a big problem. We don't say, okay, let's solve this in the most difficult way we know how, because if you think about the environment as a large problem, it is difficult to solve, right? If Airbus wants to solve this problem, it can do the difficult thing and say, scrap all production. We're gonna not produce a single plane for the next 5 years, and the first thing that's gonna come out next is gonna be an environmentally friendly plane. They can do that, but it's the hard thing to do, right? So what's the next easiest thing to do? I'll tell you about the plane we're gonna produce in 15 or 5 years, right? That's the next best thing. We are committed to the environment. We want to do something about the future. We're working towards it. And that's the next best thing that they can do at this point right now without hurting this really essential thing that the company has to do from day to day, right?
But in the meantime, the planes they're selling, in their lifetime will release like billions worth of emissions, you know, and that's already in, right? So there's an interesting article called titled "Why Bankers Close Their Ears to the Climate Nut Jobs," talking about the end of the world. And obviously this goes back to that HSBC commentary of the, you know, the head of responsible banking. But basically what this is saying is people in the financial industry, so the central bankers as well, do not understand the difference between a crisis and a collapse. Or if they do, in theory, they are too constrained by established ways of thinking to act on their knowledge. So, you know, the inflation, you know, COVID, Russian militarism, the world will suffer loss and damage. But from an economic point of view, there's another side that we'll eventually get to. You know, we'll get past it, right? But from a collapse perspective, which is basically what the climate scientists are saying has begun, they don't know how to do that. They don't know how to think about that. They don't know, you know, they don't know how to prepare for that. So there's no, you know, so there are no climactic equivalents of interest rate rises or furlough payments to return us to a tolerable equilibrium. So I found that a really, there's mindsets in industries around the world, and they don't know how to shift. You know, and something like your book, Anna, that has the potential to help people just make that shift. They can't, you know, because I remember Anna and I years ago sat down and both of us were talking about what we were seeing. And, you know, I remember one thing I said about the global economy, Anna, you were like, whoa, you really see that? Because when you talk about the economy, Joe, the economy is what is creating the problem.
Yeah.
So, you know, for years I've said we have to destroy the global economy.
Yeah. And so here, I think what the problem sometimes is also is that, okay, we do need to go in the other direction, right? But we still have the same, we sometimes we're stuck in the same vehicle for now, right? So using a car analogy, probably the worst thing to try and use for an environmental issue. When you want to go from fifth gear and going down 120 kilometers an hour in the wrong direction to reverse, you can't slam it into reverse, right? We have to go through that.
That's called ripping the gearbox out.
We have to go through that process so that we get to the point where we slow down, and then we can get ourselves into reverse. And even then, still have to use a clutch so that it doesn't just stall. So that it's one of these horrible things that what we need to do is now, but can you do it right now? I mean, you know, I mean, we just say, yeah, you know what, we should not care about jobs and economies or whatever it is, because the survival of the human race is much more important. Airbus should not produce another environmentally unfriendly vehicle forever, because it should stop right now, because we know it's bad for the environment, right? But they've got to kind of they have to shift down to the gears. They have to slow it down. They have to get to the point where they can get into the next phase where, you know, where we're going to be able to fly and not have that kind of negative impact. It's just the way.
I'm totally with you, Joe. But we missed that chance. You know, in the 80s, you know, one of the pieces is
I need to
a piece with a stat from Jimmy Carter.
Okay, so I understand, but I don't see the feasibility of a world not flying, or else then there'd be no crossbreeding of ideas. So I understand the frustration, but like, I look at you, for example, Andrea, you wouldn't have met your husband, like you wouldn't have your beautiful kids. Like it's all these things that like, I can't visualize that, and I understand the frustration. But there's also a limitation in that thinking as well. I need to drop off. It's been a wonderful conversation. I hope that you guys have the rest of the wonderful day, and lots of love. Bye, guys.
Thanks for joining us. All right, I was going to wrap up.
Bye, Yasmine.
But Joe, that point that you were just making, like, yes, absolutely, we can't do it, right? But we decide, or nature decides, and the decision is being made as we speak, and that's where we are. And you know, the scientists are talking about collapse. We're looking at the temperatures. You know, the Europeans are getting hammered. You know, the stories that are coming out of some of those parts of Europe are just horrendous. Famine for the next decade. I mean, we are in that. So we decide, or nature decides. And so
what I'm suggesting actually is, I mean, is it going to get worse? It is going. I think you're right about that. As in, it's going to get worse. But what I don't maybe what I'm hoping we're doing is we've begun at least to change that direction, as it were, because like the oil tanker, another bad metaphor to use on a show about this. When you change that course of an oil tanker, it's going to keep going in that direction for quite a long time before it has any chance of coming around, right? And
but Joe,
you're right. It's going to get.
But Joe, that's one of the reasons why, when it comes to oil tanking, they say the invention of the trim tab was the key thing. So I personally find that the metaphors that sound like we have to drop the entire system and swap to it, and swap like it's a hard stop. I'm talking about the metaphor as opposed to the reality that the economic structures we've had historically are not serving a sustainable future, and therefore a forward-leaning new structure is required. I'm fully on board on that one. But what I've noticed is that every time people see it as being too big and too hard, they stop and they go, "Let me go and focus on something else."
Yep.
And so
that's kind of the thing, right? I mean, more and more the cases coming for the cases being made for terrorism, right? I mean, it's like it seems to be that would be one of the ways. So, for me, what I like to use as an idea, right, is I find that when I'm driving, I always find people spend too much time putting high beams and hitting the horn. I always talk about let's do more driving. As in like let's steer, let's move, let's try and make the move. If things are going as they are right now, how do we move faster out of this instead of staying in the mire and trying to figure out this thing as it is right now? No, let's change course. Let's try and move as quickly as we can, but realize there's still going to be some movement. And sometimes, some things you're gonna hit some things on the way out. Not all of us are going to make it through this thing, but I mean, it's a big accident that's ahead of us. It's we're traveling at speed. We're all going in that direction. We've all got to do some kind of steering. Some of us are going to make it out, and some of us aren't. That's kind of where we are,
So the bigger, bolder, braver decisions that we make today, I mean, the more people will have a chance, right? And like you guys, I know, I get it, right? I know what I'm saying and how extreme it is, but from everything I've seen, and Denise has said collapse by 2035. Yeah, Matt, it's going to. But between now and 2035, it's going to be crapper and crapper and crapper and crapper, and that's.
Well, I see this like the way we look at 9/11, right? You think about what happened then. You think about the collapse of the Twin Towers, and yes, collapse, right? But that wasn't the end of the story. That's the thing that I think we have to think about, because we're gonna go through this. We're gonna get to a patch where it's gonna be terrible. We're gonna hear some terrible stories in the next few years. We're gonna hear about death and famine at a scale that it's gonna be very uncomfortable to think of today, but will be normal in 5 years or 10 years time. And then hopefully where our trajectory is moving away from there, where we're going to be in that place where we're moving away from famine, away from unsustainable things, because again, we got there and realized, you know what, it's not where we want to be.
Well, we either shrink our lives or our ability to live on this planet will shrink, and you've got to hope. Wait a minute, we just got one more question.
It's nearly 20 past and I'm running massively late, so
all right.
I need
to finish up. Thanks, Anna.
Wish you all. It's been absolutely lovely, and thank you for including me in the season finale.
Yes.
It is absolutely glorious, and next time I'll know to add an extra half hour onto the meeting time.
Yeah, you never know where it's going to go.
I know. But, absolutely gorgeous. Right. To a wonderful next season.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Joe. What's keeping you distracted? I'm just on Netflix trying to remember the name of my distraction. Wait, there it is. Yeah, found it. Have you got yours?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
All right.
I turned on Disney Plus for a change, and so what happens is I know that different channels, different platforms are sort of like building up on the number of shows that they have. So on Disney Plus, I finally let them I let them build up 5 shows, and I watch all 5 of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and there is still, of course, going to be a 6th, right? And I also was very curious about the launch of a new series, a new Marvel series, which features a brown main character. So, and I saw interviews with her, an Indian girl, Pakistani. So she's not only brown, she's also Muslim, and it's a superhero, and she's a girl, right? So all of the things there. So it's Miss Marvel, and the first 2 episodes have dropped, and there is a kind of great feeling about the show. I just want to recommend it as a feel good superhero show built around a teenage star. So it's a little bit like, if you want to think about it, a little bit like Spider-Man, but even less serious than that, if you can imagine that. Yeah.
And I think that's something that should be supported so it can be successful, so that they can do more things like that, right? Okay, so my new love affair is called God's Favorite Idiot, and it's on Netflix, and it stars Melissa McCarthy, and it took me 5 episodes to go, okay, this is great. And the reason it did is because for me, comedy is important, right? So, but it's got to be intelligent, and some people love it from the beginning, but it just wasn't quite working for me. And by episode 5, I'm like, okay, right, yeah, beautiful. So why I love it so much is there's the bad people, there's the naive people, and then there's all the ordinary people in the middle just going, oh my God, why do we have to put up with these types of people? So it's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek, but it's representative of our global society and how bloody ridiculous we all are. Magnus Sabansky is God. There's angels and the devil. It's just the way they speak to each other. Being appropriate in the office, the way you speak to each other, all that sort of stuff, right? It takes the piss out of everything. And because it takes the piss out of everything, I think it will be more successful because, Don't Look Up, it was bagging one side, whereas this just bags everyone. And I think it's worth watching just for that, because we are all ridiculous. It
sounds a little bit like a Monty Python series, actually.
Like,
Monty Python's always taking these little snippets of everything and all the ridiculous stuff put together. This one sounds like they've taken one idea and said, let's make it last as long as possible. And by the sounds of it, because what I'm impressed by actually is how much time you gave it to get to the point where you thought, oh yes, this is okay. 5 episodes.
Oh no, because Melissa McCarthy,
3, right? Yeah,
no, Melissa McCarthy, I love her. I think she's brilliant. So
yeah, I'm
like, it's got to be. And some of the jokes are really funny, but it just wasn't gelling. So I definitely recommend it. God's Favorite Idiot. So
yeah,
I'm sure we'll talk about it at some time. So let's wrap up, Joe. It's been awesome. We've by the time we come back in September, it's going to be good to have a break from it, because it does take a lot out, right? Just sort of doing something, just talking about this stuff and staying on top of it all the time, which I'll keep doing anyway. But it's been a pleasure. We've missed Tim. It's been awesome, all the guests that we've had and people who've wanted to come and join us and just talk about the stuff that matters. And we appreciate everyone tuning in. And a lot of people do it after. So but thank you.
Well, I want to say a big thank you to you, because for me, I my attention goes to wherever someone calls for my attention, and what you've been doing is you've been regularly calling my attention to this, and so I show up for this. And as our show lengths have been increasing over the time, and I think it's testimony to this, is that we have a lot to say about a lot of things, right? So
you should say how much I missed.
For giving me a weekly outlet. I think you've given a bit of a valve, a bit of a release, so that my wife doesn't have to deal with the stuff in my head as well. But, this has been really good, and really for those people who've been following and listening and all that, and wondering what's all this about. I mean, the idea really is to think a little bit further than what you might normally think about. I think that the world today is just stuck in the I heard this and I'm going to borrow that and use that, right? They don't go into that next phase, which is like, I heard this and I also heard that, and then now I'm going to have to think about all these things, and I'm going to come up with my own idea. And then before I say something to somebody else, I want to find out if any of these things were really true, that sort of thing. I'm hoping for more of that. And I wrote something on my diary, which has been up, for months now. And it's about, something that I wanted to get going, right? And it was because I don't have enough sleep, I keep forgetting. But basically, I said save. Here we go. Save intellect, as in save the world, save intellect. And I kept saying to myself, I need to do something about that. I need to do something about that. Do some kind of a show or program. And this is actually it. This is actually the show that is where I'm doing, I think, as much of that as I can on a weekly basis. I'm trying to get people to think a little bit. As I say something, you go like, oh, right, And sometimes it sometimes requires people to push against what is a popular view, because there is truth in everything. There is truth, even on the side you don't want to see. There's something there, Yeah.
But that's the thing I've been saying for a really long time. We just need to think. We need to get people thinking. People aren't thinking. We're walking through life and we're existing, but we're not thinking, and it's so important. But huge thank you to, there's a few people that always check in. So obviously Denise has been having a great chat with us here in the comments. We can't put him up, but it's been awesome. Steve watches every single episode, my husband, and he was on it last week. Clinton in Melbourne, he's always checking in, and he made a decision that he just wanted to learn more, he wanted to listen more, and he wanted to think more. So, that's great. And, there's other people, but just people have been reaching out to me privately, and, we sort of see, 200 sort of people watching it. And, we need to be thinking more. So we will see you when we come back in September. We're going to try and work out a way of getting it structured so that we can shrink it. But, like this, half the news items that I wanted to discuss, we didn't have time to discuss, because you never know which area we're going to focus on based on who's joining the conversation. So we say thank you to everyone for being with us, and we'll see you when we're all back from holidays, hopefully feeling a little bit more refreshed and alive. All right. See you soon.
Take care.